Hello there, and welcome to the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name, yes, it's Craig Telfer, and right now I am joined by my close associate, Shaughan McGuigan.
Hello there.
And you know what happens when the Ricky Butcher and Bianca Jackson of the Terrace get together? That's right, we're going to have a great big screaming match in a pub full of strangers. We'll kiss and make up, and then we'll chat about some lower league Scottish football. For a long time, Shaughan, I've wanted to get some EastEnders references into these introductions, so finally, on our first podcast of the 2024-25 season, I've managed to do it.
I'm glad you've went for one that I kind of understand. Bianca it was Bianca that used to shout, Ricky?
The very same, yes. I was looking on the Wikipedia article, the list of prisoners to have been served whole life tariffs in England and Wales. I was going to mention one of them. There was actually two guys that they were already in prison for pretty serious crimes. They had lured another guy to a prison cell and basically did some heinous things to him. They have been given whole life orders. I was going to say we are the such and such, but I thought better of it. Let's go for something a bit more palatable. And I think that Ricky Butcher and Bianca Jackson, we can just about handle that.
I mean, they're part of a soap opera that most people have taken to their heart, unlike people that are incarcerated for whole of life sentences.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, the guy they mashed up was a bad guy himself. So I think when it comes to prison, just kind of let these guys get on with it, particularly on that cell of that wing of the prison. But anyway, enough about recidivism and all sorts. Let's talk about some lower league Scottish football. Effectively, there's so much that's happened in the Championship, League One and League Two over the past 7 days. We had originally intended to run with our patented 3-game podcast, and that's right, that podcast is patented. But we thought we'd do a grab bag instead. The grab bags are also patented, so don't get any ideas. And on this show, we're going to discuss the crazy world of Hamilton Academical, the flag days that happened at Falkirk and Stenhousemuir, and the highest scoring game of the weekend. But first, Shaughan, I think we have to start with Raith Rovers because they parted company with Ian Murray in the wake of their narrow defeat to Airdronians on Saturday. The club posted a short statement saying that despite finishing second last season, results and performances since the turn of the year have fallen short of expectations, and the board has therefore decided to terminate the manager's contract. I think this caught a lot of people by surprise, given how well Raith Rovers had done last season, the fact that we were one game into the league campaign. But from speaking to yourself in passing, you don't seem to be particularly upset by it.
I do so. That's probably a fair summary. To be fair, going back to when it was announced, the fact that I let out an audible gasp, like as if I was watching a horror film and suffered a jump scare, would suggest that I was very, very surprised at the decision. At no point did I think that Ian Murray's job was under threat. I really didn't. I don't know if anybody thought Ian Murray's job was under threat, apart from various board members at Starts Park.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised. I felt really bad for Ian Murray, because certainly at face value, it felt like it was a decision that wasn't warranted. And I like Ian Murray. I think I like him as much as, in terms of a Raith manager, and in terms of listening to his post-match stuff, I think I like him as much as anybody, so I felt bad for that. But interestingly, what I didn't feel was I wasn't gutted. I wasn't gutted at the fact that he was moving on. I was kind of surprised at that, and I felt kind of guilty. But I wasn't. I wasn't gutted at the decision. And in terms of, it was a very brief statement. I think it was 90 words.
Yeah, it's about 5 sentences across 4 paragraphs. Aye.
And I think in terms of, if we only had the statement to go on to start with, and it talked about the fact that they hadn't been particularly happy at how form and performances had been since the turn of the year. It wasn't something that I'd really particularly thought about. There was points in the second half of last season where there was some terrible results and terrible game management, and kind of the game at Tannadice, for example, where Dundee United won 2-0. I thought how Raith set up was really poor. We spoke about it on this podcast, but at no point did I think his tenure was under threat. It was only when you go back and start to look that I started to think that there was a logic behind it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. I didn't see Ian Murray's post-match interview following the Airdrieonians game, so I don't know what he made of it. I did watch the highlights, and it seemed very one-sided. It seemed like Airdrieonians were by far and away the better team. 1-0 probably flatters Raith Rovers, and the only chances that Raith really had came through some uncertainty from Murray Johnson in the Airdrieonians' goal. Seemed like Airdrie were the better team, so I haven't had a chance to listen to Murray's post-match interview. I did, however, watch the 20-minute interview that the club put up with Andy Barrowman. I think he's he's not the CEO, is he?
I think he is the CEO.
Yeah, fair play, but I think he is perhaps the most senior person at that football club. And he outlined the decision, and when he breaks it down, and it's very interesting, it does touch on points that you've made there, because he said this isn't about, for us, this wasn't the first game of the season. This was the 8th game of the season when he talks about the pre-season games, and he talks about the League Cup fixtures. But when he goes back and explains how underwhelming Raith Rovers had been since the turn of the year, there's a fairly large sample size to suggest that the club weren't progressing under Murray. And the fact that he was removed at this time of the season, it is unusual, just because effectively he said 8 games. I think it's 1 game into the season. You don't see it often, but Barrowman was keen to say that doesn't really matter. It was the right thing to do. So what did you make of Andy Barrowman's interview?
So I tell you what, let's go back to the game first of all, because I watched Saturday's game, and I suppose,
were you there for it?
No, but I managed to I watched a stream of it, so I did see the full 90 minutes, and because I think a lot of how I feel is based on what I discussed on the preview podcast, and I totally appreciate that I was probably less enthusiastic about this season than most Raith Rovers fans. But what I discussed a couple of weeks ago was I felt that Raith wouldn't be in the equation for the title, and could certainly possibly miss out on the playoffs altogether. Mm-hmm. But I also didn't think there'd be too much in it. And we kind of touched on the fact that there was probably, we thought there might be 6 teams that were looking to finish in the top 4, or we expected to be challenging for the top 4, and maybe another 4 that would be also runs. Based on Saturday's performance, where they essentially created no chances whatsoever, I didn't think Airdrie were great by any stretch of imagination, but they were far and away the better team. Thoroughly deserved the 3 points, could have won by more goals. And the fact that they don't create a goal, that Raith don't create a goal scoring opportunity at all, I went from thinking, right, they might struggle this season, to, based purely on those 90 minutes on Saturday, they look like a team who would be looking behind, like over their shoulder, rather than a team that would be looking up the table. So that was my first concern. I was more worried after the game than I was going into it. Ian Murray then, and I like listening to Ian Murray, and that's quite rare. I don't always enjoy listening to managers post-game. A lot of it's cliche, a lot of it you can tell they don't want to be there. Maybe Ian Murray didn't want to be there either. But generally he's honest. I don't always agree with him, but I think he's very honest. I think he's an interesting listen. And to be fair, I know when you're kind of watching this or watching it back again after the event, it can kind of feel like a conspiracy theory. You maybe look into it too much and think, maybe he was meaning this, or maybe that was a dig at the board, or maybe this was. But it felt like a different kind of post-match interview. It felt like somebody who was not necessarily up against it, but certainly somebody who was struggling to come up with answers as to why they were so poor on the Saturday. He talked about the fact that he mentioned the players not being fit. He mentioned sharpness and fitness, which I thought was unusual, because ultimately
you're responsible for it.
That's his remit. Yes, there's strength and condition coaches there. One of them has just come in over the summer. But he mentioned this, and I thought, right, well, ultimately that's your remit. Are you suggesting that maybe you're not happy with the strength and condition coach that's come in? Again, though, that's probably just a reach. He did mention something though. Again, I touched on this, and I think every Raith Rovers fan has felt this since January-ish, if not slightly longer, that something isn't quite right, something that you can't put your finger on, an intangible, I suppose. And Ian Murray said that he was quite right. He said, I could have played in goals for Airdrie today and I would have kept a clean sheet. He goes, we haven't created any chances whatsoever. He goes, I feel I've got a talented squad. He goes, but something isn't quite right. He goes, and we need to go away and look at it. He goes, I think it's going to be an interesting 48 hours. He goes, whether it's to do with, and he said, what did he say? He said, whether it's to do with tactics, whether it's to do with fitness, whether it's to do with sharpness, whether it's to do with attitude, I don't really know. And I thought, that's quite an interesting thing to say. He touched on the fact that he felt that they needed to bring in reinforcements. He said that they needed players that had legs, which I thought was an interesting thing to say. And as much as I didn't watch it and think, oh, Ian Murray's reaching the end of his tenure here, but it very much came across as a manager who was struggling to come up with answers to the questions that we've been asking since January, I suppose.
I think if he didn't have the answers then, or certainly if he didn't have the answers in January, February, March, April, May, when you were like pretty easily dealt with by Ross County, it just begs the question, if they had these doubts going back to the start of the year, why not do something about it after that game? Because that felt like effectively, I'd say it effectively felt like it is a full stop at the end of that season. And that's the perfect time to move the manager on, bring someone else in and allow him to, get his feet under the desk and start building for the season ahead. And it feels as though that by not doing that, if they had doubts about him then, that's perhaps, you could say the board have acted decisively by doing this, but you could also say they've acted indecisively as well by not acting on these doubts that they had back then.
So that's how I feel about it. And maybe I'm just being contrarian. I don't know, but obviously listen, the optics aren't great. If you sack a manager after one league game, people ask questions, and rightly so, and people say, well, that's knee-jerk. However, I got the impression listening to Andy Barrowman on Monday night that there's been questions about this for quite some time. So I suppose if they've been thinking about this since May, for example, or April, or whatever it was, then I suppose that's the opposite of knee-jerk. Then they've drawn it out, I suppose. And Barrowman did touch on this. He said that they felt that the board, that Murray deserved another go at it. I suppose it still feels like a weird time to do it. But I suppose if you bring somebody else in, there is still, the transfer window is still open. There is still a budget to play with. So again, there is a logic to it. And like I said this on Pie and Bovril, I can sit down with somebody who thinks this is a terrible decision and that it deserves more time, and I would struggle to disagree with it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when I am looking at like Raith Rovers results since they won at Tannadice, since they won 1-0 Dylan Easton's goal in December, they've played 31 competitive games. They've lost more games than they've won. They've won 11, they've lost 13. So by that very simplistic statistic, I suppose it does make a kind of a logic to what Andy Barrowman is suggesting.
I do feel sorry for Murray in a lot of ways, and like I said at the start there, I think a lot of people will be looking in on this from the outside and thinking, what a decision, why have they made this decision? It seems very unfair. And I suppose for the Rovers fans, I suppose like from yourself, given where he has taken the club to and given you some great moments over last season, how do you think, and on top of that as well, Barrowman made again, I thought was another nice point when he said this won't have affected Ian Murray's reputation or his standing within Scottish football at all. How do you think we'll answer that in two questions. Do you think Barrowman's correct to say that in terms of Murray's standing? And the second question is, how do you think Rovers fans will generally remember Ian Murray's time in charge of the club?
So in terms of Barrowman's point, I agree. I mean, generally speaking, when a manager is let go or he's sacked or however you want to describe it, it's because things have been going extremely poorly. I don't think it would take Ian Murray a lot of spin to suggest that actually he'd done quite well at Raith Rovers.
Yeah.
So I think when he goes to his next job interview, he could say that he had, other than when we finished second under McGuigan in 2010, 2011, it's Raith's highest finish in whatever it is, 30 years maybe. So inarguably, he has done well in his time at Raith Rovers. And I think even if you want to go back to the season before that, like he picked up a fairly grim Raith Rovers squad when John McGuigan left. Ended up finishing, I think it was 7th.
Give us some of the names that were kicking about then.
Oh, Connor Shields?
Oh,
He might have been at Stenny for a bit as well.
Oh, Conor McBride.
McBride. Like we had a very poor squad, and I think between Ian Murray's leadership and Aidan Connolly's performances, more than anybody else, that kept him out of danger. And then ultimately last season, I've spoken about many, many, many times, that was as good a laugh and had as many thrilling moments as I've had in any season supporting Raith Rovers. So like, it goes in my best wishes, and I think there are some strange people in Pine Bovril that disagree. I think most Raith Rovers fans would say exactly the same.
What happens next? John Potter is taking the club for the weekend's game. Remind me, Shaughan, who they're playing?
They are at home to Partick Thistle.
Right, okay. A pretty tricky tie then against Partick Thistle. John Potter is taking the side. And John Potter's got a fairly important role within the club. When did John Potter become such a Svengali?
When he joined the club with Andrew Barrowman and Dean McKenzie and the rest of the Raith Rovers board. I don't know how much of an input he has.
They say that he's very influential in bringing players into the club. I'm sure that he is a very good salesman for Raith Rovers, and he's been able to attract a calibre player that you might not have been able to attract in the past.
Agreed. And I, again, mentioned it on this podcast before, the amount of players that come in the club, and when they sit down with David Hancock at Raith TV and they have their first interview, a number of them have mentioned the fact that John Potter really, really sold the club to them. So in terms of that side of things, all seems very positive. Whether he has any more input than that, I genuinely have no idea. He's a technical director rather than a director of football. What the difference is, whether there's a difference, I have no idea. I suppose that will potentially limit who would be attracted to the club. Like if you're a manager who you want to identify
control. Yeah.
Yes, you want to identify. So David Martindale, for example, I would imagine is not going to be attracted to anything like that. So I suppose that potentially does limit them. I would be judged by, again, what Barrowman said on Monday, and again, I could be reading too much into it. I kind of got the impression that they'd already identified somebody, and it was maybe a case of crossing the T's and dotting the I's.
One of the names, Peter Leven, who was formerly sort of interim charge at Aberdeen.
I mean, potentially. Would they be any good? With no idea. I mean, they had such a small sample size at Aberdeen, and by and large, the results were good. A couple of draws with Celtic, lost some penalties in the cup final. I think only lost to Dundee.
I'm sure there was an article that listed some potential managers that Raith Rovers could go into. One of the names was John Hughes, who I believe has got unfinished business at Starks Park. I don't know what that business is. Perhaps arson. It seems to be the only conceivable reason he'd want to go back there.
This was the Football Scotland article. Now, I rarely click on them, but I thought I'm going to click on this. Let's have a
You got a rise out you.
It did really did.
You get it.
It said that Marvin Bartley was really unfortunate at Queen of the South, and that perhaps he would be in the equation. It was a bad article. I would like Gary Bowyer, for example. Won the league a couple of seasons ago at Dundee, has a good CV. Whether he'd be willing to work under the circumstances that Raith have, I don't know. I mean, we're recording this on a Thursday. Based on again, Barrowman's interview on the Monday evening, like David Hancock did say, do you think this will take days rather than weeks?
Yeah.
He said that he hoped it would take days. Kind of wondered if maybe there'd be something not necessarily confirmed, but a kind of hard rumour, I suppose. Hasn't been the case. I'm now starting to suspect that on Saturday that you'll have Potter and Mickey Cameron in charge of first team affairs. They'll be in the dugout. I wouldn't be surprised if the person who will be officially the next manager will be in the stand watching. That's what I think will happen now.
Yeah, well, good luck, Shaughan, going forward, because yes, it just feels like it feels like a strange, untimely decision, because it is an untimely decision.
Just like one kind of last point on this, and I suppose, again, as much as I was an Ian Murray fan, and I suppose you could pour over any run of games under a manager. But I suppose if you set a budget, I think Raith now have a budget that you would hope to be winning the league, or be there or thereabouts in terms of winning the league. If they were doubtful about what they watched from the kind of tail end of the season onwards, there was a lot of missteps, and I think a lot of it was like they would concede 2 goals very, very close together. They dropped points to, like, they were 2-0 up against Arbroath, and drew 2-2, despite the fact they had a troublemaking goalkeeper up front. Like the 3-2 defeat at Gayfield. I mean, like, that's the only game Arbroath have won since the only league game Arbroath have won since the middle of August. The game at Tannadice, where Ian Murray set them up in a very strange manner. I suppose when you add all those things, as I said, when you add all those things up, there is a logic to it. But I suppose the proof is in the pudding. And if they appoint somebody who gets even less out of the squad of players, or has no improvement whatsoever, then it'll be a fairly big black mark against a board who, like, it felt like they consistently make good decisions.
Yeah. But we will stick with the Championship, Shaughan, and when we recorded our big lower league preview podcast, and thank you very much to everyone who's got in touch with us to say that they completed it. They have sent Shaughan and I the code word to let us know they completed it. That's meant a lot to us, and we really hope you have enjoyed it. But during that podcast, Shaughan, we talked about Hamilton Academical, and we said that everything they'd done so far had been reasonably sensible in terms of the players that they brought into the club. They seem to be moving in a positive direction. One of the two of us, I can't remember which one, said that Accies could even finish in the top 4. Can't remember. It might have been you, might have been me.
No, that was definitely you. I had them considerably low.
Whoever said it doesn't really matter. One of us said it. I think it mightn't be me, might have been yourself. But one of the things that we said, that for Accies, silliness is never far away from them. That there's always, no matter the longer you go without nonsense at Hamilton, the closer it's likely to be there. And sure enough, we were proven 100% correct. We just didn't think it would be like before the Championship season actually kicked off. Because about this time last week, it was announced that the players hadn't been paid. This was a couple of days before their game against Ayr United on Saturday. And the papers think it was the Daily Record, or certainly one of the Daily Record sister titles, or the smaller satellite titles that sits underneath it. They claimed the players and the coaches had walked out of training after their wages hadn't gone through. And a spokesman for Hamilton claimed it was a global internet banking issue. I mean, nothing's really happened since then. They played the game against Ayr United. They lost that match 2-0. I think they were well beaten, but quite unfortunate at the same time with some of the chances that they hit the post, they hit the crossbar. But what were your thoughts on this happening at Hamilton? A global internet banking issue located entirely with the New Douglas Park area of Scotland.
See what happened. I remembered actually. So the day before Scotland versus Switzerland, I was sitting outside a pub in Cologne next to the river. And there was, I think it was a father and son, were sitting at the table next to me. And so everybody's talking about football, so everybody ends up talking to everybody else, whether you know them or you're a stranger or whatever. So I got talking to the two guys that were next to me, and the older guy, who I presumed was the dad. He started telling me about the fact that he was joining the Hamilton board, and he was the new club secretary. I suddenly went back to the fact that he could only have been back in the country about 2 weeks, and already he's up to his ears in a complete crisis. But you're right, it felt like they were doing lots of sensible things. And as soon as you hear that, because I think I got a message, whether it was on Twitter or Instagram, I can't remember. But it was somebody who had listened to the preview podcast and said, your predictions about Hamilton are already knackered. They're clearly going to finish bottom. And I was like, you're absolutely right. This is a disaster in the making. And we've seen it. We've seen it several times before. As soon as something like this happens, that players aren't paid, they had to walk out in terms of they didn't train in the build up to, didn't train at least one day in the build up to that game against United. You think this is the start of it. This is the start of it, and things are going to go downhill from here. Only thing I would say is it feels like it's kind of went quiet.
Yeah, I'm going to assume it's been resolved. The players have been paid. The global internet banking issue has been dealt with, and it's the club can kick on. But of course, the Hamilton have got a history of that, haven't they? It was a game, I think it was in the 1999-2000. They were supposed to be taking on Stenhousemuir.
Yep.
And the players just didn't turn up over unpaid wages, and they were given a massive, was it a 15-point deduction?
It was just enough points to, I think it was just enough points to put them bottom in the league, and ultimately it relegated them. Yeah, you're absolutely right. No strangers to that. I suppose we could take it at face value and presume that everything is now rectified. But what I would say is that in terms of I suppose the finances around Hamilton, I mean, they have is it Serif Zengen?
Yes.
I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. The Turkish owner, or the kind of Turkish backer. They are entirely reliant on him, surely. Mm-hmm. So in terms of and even last season, let's take a look at last season, in that they don't have large attendances. Maybe just scraped into four figures last season in terms of average attendances. Now they had a good full-time squad, but not just that. It was a large. Yeah, it was really big. Wasn't it? A large. Good full-time squad.
And on top of that, this squad is quite large as well. We mentioned that in our preview podcast. We expected about 5 or 6 players to move out the way certainly before the transfer window closes.
I do think they've made inroads into kind of pruning it, but by the same token, they've brought in players like Ollie Shaw, for example, who you would imagine is on decent wages. So this, I know there was a Q&A that Zengen was part of. Might have been about 3 weeks ago. And from what I gather, from what I read, that by and large, the fans were reasonably upbeat and optimistic about what he was telling them. But as ever, when people like that get involved with very much provincial Scottish football teams, you always kind of wonder, well, what exactly is the end game here? How do you make this club self-sustainable? Because it doesn't feel possible at this moment in time.
And especially a club like Hamilton as well, who I can't go historically through the people that have owned them, but Colin McGuigan, for instance, who's been involved with them, and I think he's pretty well known, or his background. You don't need to go far to read some of the stuff about his background. And I believe he's still involved with the club to capacity. Well, he owns New Douglas Park effectively, so he is.
Somebody referenced based on the Q&A that rather than being the landlord, he is now the tenant. Now, how that works,
that's the difference very Hamilton Accies. That's a deeply Hamilton Accies thing.
It didn't make any sense to me, and whether it saves them the money, whether it legally it makes it better, I have no idea. Whether that's a benefit to Hamilton, I don't know. But yes, the fact that he is still involved isn't a good thing.
Imagine just being a supporter and you just want to pitch up and just watch your club every week. I'm trying to think, in Scottish football, what club has got the least degree of nonsense attached to it?
The least degree of nonsense.
The least degree of nonsense out of the 42 clubs in the SPFL, which is the least degree of nonsense? Off the top of my head, I'm thinking Hearts probably.
Oh, come on now. They've been relegated a few times. They were in
relegated,
administration.
They do feel like they're on an but say recently Hearts feel like they're on an even keel.
Right, recently I suppose, but they have been owned by a man who lived in a submarine. I mean, that wasn't that long ago.
I don't know why I keep laughing at the Bosnian pensioners.
I was just going to say, he stole all of Bosnia's pensions. I mean, that's not that sensible.
Right, okay, so maybe over the last 20 years then, Hearts aren't a particularly good example. Then I'm trying to think, Motherwell have been in administration during that period.
Steny are sensible.
Yeah, you'd probably say, you probably would say that actually. Stenhousemuir, there's not many daft things that Stenhousemuir do, so maybe they could be. Yeah, maybe it is Stenhousemuir that are the most.
I mean, I suppose you want in terms to answer that question, you want somebody who is sensible and dare I say a little dull, and maybe Steny would fall under that category.
I suppose so, because as a football supporter, when you're complaining about your club or you're having a wheeze about your club, all you want to really have a wheeze about is say like what's going on in the pitch. And maybe daft things like maybe you're complaining about the ticket prices or the pies or anything. You don't want to fundamentally complain about the club's very existence. And thankfully, that is something I've never had to contend with at Steny. God, you think about the Rovers, the relegations, Claude and Elka. You lived through Claude and Elka's time in charge of Raith Rovers.
Gary Locke, John Hughes.
Gary Locke and John Hughes. Barry Smith. Oh my goodness. Yeah. But Hamilton, it just seems... Because like Raith Rovers at the moment, yes, there's a bit of flux with Murray moving on, but just off the pitch, they seem like in a good place.
Yeah.
Hamilton, it's just I don't think I'd have to go on blood thinners to support a team like Hamilton.
It's just the fact that they're ultimately at the whim of their current owner. Like if he's struck by lightning or gets fed up, then they're in a bit of bother.
Let's hope that doesn't happen. Let's hope that Hamilton Academical can thrive, overcome their banking issues, finally sort out their Twitter accounts and just go on and have a successful season just for once. For once, have a successful season. Just a fuss-free, like 2 up, 2 down, vanilla ice cream, missionary sex.
Finish fifth.
Finish fifth. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Just go out and enjoy yourselves. Now, we'll stick with the Championship as well, Shaughan, but we'll combine the Championship with League One because we are going to talk about Flag Day. And it was a Flag Day for both Falkirk and Stenhousemuir. Both clubs had terrific seasons last year. The Bairns enjoyed an invincible campaign in League One. They returned to the second tier after 5 long years in the wilderness. And Stenhousemuir won their first league title in their 140-year history. And both teams kicked off the campaign by raising the championship flags. Falkirk did it on Friday night before their game against Queen's Park, and Steny would do the same on Saturday afternoon in advance of their contest with Arbroath. We'll talk about Falkirk first. Falkirk beat Queen's Park 2-1. Very assured performance, very deserved 2-1 win over the Spiders as well. Calvin Miller and Sean Mackey with the goals, and Dom Thomas scored an absolute stunner to get Queens off the mark. Craig Cairns has been doing his At The Match podcast on Patreon, so they're very, very good. They're worth actually subscribing for. So we won't linger too long on that game, but it was the game that was on Friday night on the BBC Scotland channel. I watched this. I thought this was a lot of fun, and I think Falkirk were really good here.
Yeah, and I think Falkirk are in one of those situations that don't come around too often for anybody in Scottish football, where it's just they are essentially like riding the crest of a wave, I suppose is the only way I could describe it, in terms of there is a connection between the fans and the team. And I think what you would say about the Falkirk Stadium, probably had like maybe ever since it was built. Okay, I know they've had big attendances and good results and good teams, sorry. But certainly you're now going back a number of years, and certainly the atmosphere's been flat. The team's not been very good. They now have a good team, and they have a great atmosphere. They've got the ultras, and it feels like the ultras are feeding off the team, and the team is feeding off the crowd. And that momentum that we mentioned on the preview podcast, that I certainly expected them to carry into this season. I expect them to beat Queen's Park.
Mm-hmm.
It maybe wasn't straightforward, but it was thoroughly deserved. And they did nothing to dispel the notion that I expect them to be in the top half of this division.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. The only thing that I did find not quite grating, but I think it was perhaps a lack of imagination on the pundits' part, but they kept on going, can Falkirk win the league? That seemed to be a recurring theme through it, and it's, I think, well, let's see, they're taking their first steps after a long time away in the championship with effectively the same group of players. The same group of players who, collectively they've been excellent together, but individually at that level in the past, perhaps haven't flourished or played at their best. They're taking on an understrength Queen's Park team that are probably about 2 or 3 players away from having a decent squad to work with. I fully expected Falkirk to win this one. I thought they played with a bit of razzmatazz. I thought Brad Spencer had a really good game. I thought Ross McKeever had a good game. Calvin Miller played well. They largely defended well, and spells Cole Donaldson played well when called upon. And it was just, the match played out as I expected it to. And that's not to be like dismissive or cheeky about any of the teams, but it's just Falkirk are coming into the season off a good feeling, and so are Stenhousemuir as well, by the way. So just when you're talking about riding the crest of a wave, let's not get too carried away. But yeah, the match went how it did. A couple of sticky moments, but on the whole, they were the better side, created more chances, had more of the ball. Yeah, it's a funny one. There's not too much to analyse from this game. My favourite bit in the match was Callum Ferry's save from Ross McKeever's shot. Mm-hmm. My favourite thing about it, see the way Ross McKeever put his foot on his studs in the ball and rolled it to create a bit of momentum for it, and then followed through a brilliant shot and a terrific save from Callum Ferry. That was my favourite moment of the game. And Dom Thomas's goal was about 46 seconds into the second half. Stunning, absolutely stunning.
Yeah, no, both those moments were, I agree, the kind of best moments of the game. The only thing I'd add to that in terms of Falkirk, in terms of, I suppose, like the question that the pundits were asking, so can Falkirk win the league? I still think that they have a squad that is slightly on the kind of small side to cope with the rigours of the season. And the only way around that, and then maybe a way around that, is for the players that we have suggested have been either good in the championship or not quite proven themselves, to lift themselves that bit. So, and I did think that Ross McKeever, who is somebody who,
that's one of the players that would fall into that bracket,
would fall into that category, and I thought he was very, very good, involved in everything, and in a very, very positive sense. And you're right, that technique to kind of, the way he kind of got the shot off, I mean, it felt like it was perfectly placed, but Ferry is a very, very good goalkeeper. So in terms of I've spoken about Dylan Tate before. I thought he was good.
Yeah, Dylan Tate was excellent, yeah.
Brad Spencer was very good. I thought it was on the Miller Park. And the one player I thought, oh, well, you know something, maybe he is a bit better than I've given him credit for, because it's the first time I've seen it at that level, was Ross McKeever. So based on that very small sample size, I still think they will be hindered by that lack of depth, but I was impressed by them.
Yeah, there's a good feeling in the club, and that's perhaps, if you're trying to find reasons to be critical of Falkirk, or perhaps cautious for the season ahead, that's something that you would look at. Mm-hmm. But collectively, I mean, the guys have all just had an absolutely incredible season. They're going to come up confident. Yeah. And remember, these guys were playing in middling teams, like difficult, like teams that weren't necessarily successful. They're all coming up together. They're older. They're better. So that's perhaps a bit of a, maybe we were like reaching for something to be cautious about Falkirk with. But and I'll tell you another moment that I really liked as well, when Calvin Miller had that shot that was cleared off the line by Cammy Kerr.
Oh, tremendous.
But Calvin Miller starts celebrating. He actually turns around to celebrate, and then there must have been a gasp from the crowd. and turns around and can't believe that the ball's been cleared. I really like that. Like he was adamant that was in until it was cleared. What did you make of Queen's Park's performance? Anything to really light on with that?
They look like a team that isn't finished.
Yes, you can see like up front. I think that Rudden, exactly how we described them on the previous show, which if you haven't listened to it, please go and do, because we're sure I'm going to be referring to it probably the next couple of weeks very often, just to make sure you're in the loop. But I think that's Rudden's not necessarily going to hold the ball up when he's up front. You know, he can stretch defences, he can run, he can put himself about a bit, but in terms of just being able to get you up the park, he's perhaps not the best player to do that. So they do feel a wee bit short in numbers there.
And I mean, not just short numbers. I think they're short of numbers in their starting 11. Like, I think they badly need defensive reinforcements. And in terms of their bench on Friday evening, there was almost nobody there in terms of names that you would recognise, or when things weren't going their way, say, oh well, at least we can bring on whoever. Like there was just that felt like a bench of regens, and based on I think based on Callum Davidson's pre-match comments going into this weekend, it feels like there isn't going to be reinforcements coming in. So that's a huge concern for the Spiders.
And on top of that, they're playing against Livingston at Lesser Hampden. It says the hottest ticket in town, quite literally. There's no point in going over old graves, but it's just every time it feels almost inconceivable that you have redeveloped a stadium and made it not fit for purpose. Surely when this redevelopment was going on, you'd have thought, well, we're going to be using, this is going to be our home. It needs to have a capacity of about, I don't know, 3,000, 2,500, 3,000 if you're going to be a serious championship club.
I did like a suggestion on Pine Borough. I think it was either earlier this afternoon or maybe earlier this evening, and somebody said that they hoped that they were going to ask SFA about loss of earnings because they can't play at Hampden. I genuinely think you're going to ask SFA for loss of earnings at the fact that you're playing at your home stadium that you designed and you built.
Yes, aye. It really does. It does remind me of Ned Flanders' house in The Simpsons after it was destroyed by a hurricane. Just a shambles. Terrible. Just terrible. But that was Flag Day on Friday night. Shaughan, I'm going to pass the microphone over to you, and you can ask me about Flag Day on the Saturday at Oakview, where Stenhousemuir took on Arbroath and won 2-1.
Now, I was hoping to see a bit of what you produced on Saturday, because I believe that you had a microphone in hand. I believe that you had some kind of speech about was it welcoming the team out or suppose whipping the fans up?
A bit of both, yes, but perhaps not as grandiose as either of that. The usual stadium announcer, Graham Wallace, was on holiday, so he wasn't able to make it. So I was asked to go onto the pitch before the match, and I had to do a wee a wee celebration for the over-70s walking team who won the Scottish Cup, which is class. That's been a great season for Stenhousemuir across the club. The men's team won their first ever league title, the women's team won the league title, and the over-70s walking team won the Scottish Cup as well. So very successful season for everyone associated with FK5. But it was effectively just to talk a bit about flag. Not talk's the wrong word. Just welcome the team onto the pitch and do a countdown. That was effectively it. So it wasn't a massive thing. They could have easily done the day without me, but just to be there and to see it and to be standing, rather than being in the stands, to be standing facing the supporters and seeing the Arbroath players coming out and making a guard of honour. Neil Doncaster coming out, he got booed actually when I read his name out. The man just can't catch a break. But to Neil Doncaster, David Reid, interim chairman, and Ted Stokes, who's been supporting the club for decades, and I think he's an honorary board member. Perhaps you might need to correct me on that. But to see there and to see the flag being lifted, just extraordinary, man. I'd said this actually during the presentation's not the right word, but that's what I'll go with. But what we saw when we won the league against East Fife and we got presented the trophy against Bonnyrigg, those were incredible days. They were joyous days, cathartic days, really emotional days. And this, I mean, I suppose it's sunk in. It might never sunk in. It's still incredible. I still watch the videos on social media from the day and still look through the photographs from the day. I mean, it's sunk in, but this is more of a proud day because it's the first time the flag's ever been raised above Oakville View. So it was great to see in the middle of the park. The flag's absolutely smashing, and just hearing the fans chanting like "Stenny won the league at Oakville View, Championes, Championes" as the players coming out. It's brilliant, and just what just seeing the Stenhousemuir players lining up, just so incredibly proud of them. Really meant a lot to me. Really meant a lot to me to be asked to do it.
It's funny because I presumed that you'd been asked to do it because you are Stenhousemuir's second most famous fan after Michael Palin, but it turns out that just Graham Wallace was on holiday and you were available.
And Michael Palin was unavailable either. So you can't have the best, you come to the rest. I was happy with that.
But regardless, I suppose we've spoken about this, and you've literally touched on it there. The fact that you have had such a kind of unique lens on winning the title and now the flag day, like incredible. Yeah,
the trophy day especially. The trophy day was one of the best days of my life, and I've really got to thank like Scott McClimont at the SPFL for giving me the opportunity to work with Shaughan Eldebrand, his colleague at the SPFL, and go behind the scenes and be so close to it. Because I mean, if I'd been in the stands, it would have been incredible. But to be at the club for like 12 o'clock and interview the players, interview the manager, and just like the players getting their cars parked. Shaughan and I are on the pitch. We're waiting for one of the players to come along. And just the players coming, just like high-fiving them all, and everyone being in such a good mood that day. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So I'm eternally grateful for that. It's just an incredible couple of months at the club. And then topped off with the flag day, and even better, topped off with a very deserved 3 points against the Lichties.
Now, before we get to the match, I do have to ask. So the flag, because the flag is like a kind of vertical flag rather than horizontal.
Yes, it hangs down the way. Yeah,
but I suppose that's the one for Flag Day as such. But I also presume you have a normal flag that goes somewhere. Like where will that be?
I don't think flags has ever been a problem that Stenhousemuir have ever really needed to worry about before.
I thought you would know. I thought you would be the man that knew.
I don't know where they'll put it. They might put it on top of the Norway stand, or they might put it up in the far corner at Oakville View. But either way, I think it'll take a prominent place. And so it should. It's incredible. Just getting a chance to talk about it. The people who listen to this podcast will be fed up of hearing me drone on about it, but these truly are the days to shape all days upon. And it was an amazing couple of days, and just I seeing the flag going up there and being as close to it, and seeing the fans, seeing the players being that close to it, just what an experience.
Now, in terms of Saturday in general, in terms of how the game panned out, Stenny won 2-1 against Arbroath. Goals from Ross Taylor, Kyle Banner, and an excellent free kick in, I think it was injury time from Quinn Coulson. Now, I think it would be fair to say that I was not hopeful about Stenny's chances going into the season. I felt there probably wasn't enough kind of reinforcements coming in, I suppose. And you mentioned the fact that there was a crest of a wave. I didn't think there was with Stenny, because they'd drawn every game for the last quarter of last season. However, not only did you look great because you have a tremendous strip. That new home strip is exceptional. But just in general, I thought, well, to be fair, Stenny's highlights don't last too long.
No, Stenny's highlights aren't very good. Let's be honest, man.
Difficult to get a real grasp of the game, but regardless, what I did see, you looked far and away better than the Lichties. Yeah,
it's so frustrating. There was a moment in the match, I'm not kidding, not exaggerating, there must have been about like 12, 13, 14, 15 passes. Just a really, really good move. It's one of those moves, where just everyone wants to get on the ball and everyone's really enjoying it, and they're almost like taking the piss a little bit about the team. about the opposition, but the ball knocking it around like so easy, cutting through Arbroath, and it set up Adam Brown for a shot just from the edge of the area. And Aidan McAdams had to one of those saves where he goes down and has to beat it away at his post. A really, really good save. And it's like, the highlights, why are you not showing that from the start? Why are you not showing that move from the start? And there was other bits and pieces as well from the highlights that if you didn't go to the game, you'd miss so much. So it's frustrating. That's something we do need to do better. I know that having a pixel lock camera and taking the stream from that to edit the highlights together, that certainly doesn't help because you're so far away from it. And especially when you see clubs, we'll mention them every time when we talk about highlights packages. Stranraer, for instance, East Fife. We're going to be talking about their game against Elgin City just shortly, but East Fife's highlights package is excellent as well. So why can't Stenny do that? It's frustrating. Nevertheless, Stenhousemuir were really, really good. We spoke about a lack of freshness at the club because effectively they are running with the same squad as last season. There's been a handful of players that have come in, and the only player that started is Kyle Banner. And I think the only reason he started is because Nicky Jameson's out with a long-term injury. I think he'll be out for the next 3 months. However, the fact that Gary Naismith changed the formation and went with a 4-3-3 with Matty Yates playing as a false nine, it felt fresh. And the team played, so Matty Yates played as a false nine. Nat Wedderburn was dropped. Matty Aitken was dropped. Now, these have been two very important players for Stenhousemuir over the last couple of years. But I think with Wedderburn not being in the midfield, guys like Kyle Jacobs just sitting in front of defence and James Berry and Mikey Anderson playing alongside them, the team just had a bit more zest and a bit of bounce, and they didn't really let Arbroath settle. They played some really, really good football at points. We've touched on the Adam Brown shot that McAdams saved. But some of the passes of play were really, really promising. And after about 20 minutes or so, you're actually thinking, we can take Arbroath here. And I know Arbroath are in a funny position at the moment because there's a number of players who are out injured, or there's guys that are just returning to fitness after being out for a long period of time. So I think it's a bit of a cliche, but a good time to play them in that regard. But we were the better team. We were the better team throughout. And the only time it did get a bit sticky was when Coulson scored a really good free kick that caught everyone off the guard. And it's at that stage in the game where you'll have experienced it as a fan. People listening to will have experienced it, where you've been cruising throughout a match. It's been played out almost exclusively on your own terms. Then suddenly the team scores right at the very end. And for Arbroath, you know at that stage of the game when it's just injury time, Arbroath are going to have to just chuck everything at it, and you're just going to have to withstand it. And Stenhousemuir managed to do it. They rode it out and got the points. But I think that the 2-1 actually flatters Arbroath. Really impressive performance from Stenhousemuir, and perhaps the best they played probably since they beat Spartans at the back of January. And I think that talking to the fans, the feeling at the club after the game, everyone was incredibly buoyant after it, because you're coming up a division, the team hadn't been playing well in the build up to that crest, that imaginary crest of a wave I was talking about. And then all of a sudden you do that and you think, well, they're one of the favourites to win the division and you're a lot better than them. Yes, you're taking them on at a good time, but a lot to be happy about for Stenhousemuir on Saturday. And
I know you were significantly more positive about Stenny's prospects than myself. Are you reassessing that and potentially think they could? No, it's one game. It's one game, so you don't want to get too carried away. You always think, wait till they get to the end of the first quarter. Wait till you see every side. Wait till you see how their results have gone. Wait till you actually get to go to Palmerston, into the Caledonian Thistle Stadium and New Central Park and take on the other teams and see how you're doing. But I think it's a very promising start. I mean, we've got Kelty Hearts on Saturday. I don't think they're insurmountable. They got a good point against Montrose there. But I do think if we can play with that same degree of zip, then we've got a good chance. It says me earlier tonight, we're recording this on Thursday night, that's Blair Alston signed for the club. He's joined after leaving Partick Thistle last month. I'm always a bit cautious about signings like that. Guys who have moved from, especially guys in their 30s who have moved from full-time football into part-time football. Well, remember like Craig Bryson's perhaps the best example. I don't necessarily think that Alston, like Craig Bryson's had a better career than Alston's, but I'm cautious to see how it goes.
Could be an interesting option.
How old is Blair Alston though?
32.
He's only 32.
2-year contract as well they've given him.
I don't think you have to worry as much about that signing as you because you were worried about Craig Bryson. I appreciate there is a degree of trepidation about Blair Alston, but I think he will be a decent signing. I know Partick Thistle weren't overly keen on, but there is. So I don't think his legs are gone. Put it that way. But I don't think he is a player who could be at the top end of the championship, which ultimately is where Partick Thistle are. But I suspect he will be I don't think it carry away. I think he will be a good signing for you.
Wait and see. It's funny. Someday, one of the Stenny fans, like when you make your points as to why, like if I was managing the team, I wouldn't have signed Blair Alston. And he said, what kind of player would you sign? And I was trying to think actually the players around off the top of my head that I'd actually want to take it at Stenny. Maybe it's me, but you trust Gary Naismith. Certainly not let the club down over the past 12 months anyway. So you trust him to make the right decision there, and hopefully he can add something.
What about something on Arbroath? I sense that you were not overly impressed by them.
Nah, there's some good players. I think that through certainly the spine of the team, or most of the spine of the team, there's a lot. Like McAdams is a good goalkeeper. Don't really think he could have done much about either goal. He's actually quite unfortunate with Ross Taylor's goal. He makes a block, but just the way the ball ricochets, it spins up and hits the underside of the crossbar and goes over the line. And he couldn't have done much about Banner's goal. That was just a well bulleted header.
It's just what Stenny do. I thought it was quite interesting. From a league up, but you just continue to do exactly the same. You score a goal from a corner. Tam O'Brien had a good game. I think Tam O'Brien's just a really good player. And he said all right to me as well when he came on. So I'd met him at Danny Denham's wedding a couple of years ago. And that's when I saw him. So there's Tam O'Brien. He says, all right, how are you doing? And he's like, he remembers me. That's great. I think Gavin Riley was playing up front and he should have scored actually just about 4 or 5 minutes into the second half. He put a free header over the bar. Really should have scored. And I think that leads into the point we're making there about like Stenny are still a wee bit unsure of themselves when it comes to cross balls. He really should have scored in that. I thought he generally played quite well. However, in the middle of the park, they had Liam Callaghan and Craig Slater. Now, these guys are good with the ball, but I think they're quite slow in transition. And a lot of the time where you had guys like Berry, Anderson, Jacobs, if they were winning the ball back, we had guys that could go past them, like sprint past them. And I think they were quite leaden-footed in trying to catch up. And I know that like David Gold is probably someone that would start most weeks. I think he's come back from injury. And like Callahan's more of a forward player than a midfielder, certainly my understanding anyway. So I think that he was just down there to fill in. But they don't look any great shakes, Arbroath. That was the big thing. Coulson looked good when he came on. That was our thing. Coulson looked good. And I think he, off the back of that performance, you'd pick him ahead of like Innes Murray, for instance. He definitely played himself to a start. I mean, they're playing Montrose on Saturday. I think that's going to be a really interesting game. Because it feels like the clubs are on different trajectories for like a long time. Arbroath were the more dominant club for about the past like 5 years, given their time they were in the championship. But I do think Montrose will really fancy their chances, and I think that Arbroath are still trying to. That's actually been the job about 8 or 9 months. Still trying to figure out what they are under Jim McIntyre. So, I wouldn't necessarily write Arbroath completely off the back of a mediocre performance in the first game of the season when they're a bit underbaked and there's certain players aren't at their peak. However, it doesn't augur well. That's the point I'd make. No, I think as much as even the most glass half full Arbroath fan would maybe say that Jim McIntyre warranted more time this season. I think how they started on Saturday, I think if they were lose in an Angus derby to Montrose, I find it very difficult to believe that Jim McIntyre could turn it round in the eyes of the fans. I think he'd be in big trouble if they lose on Saturday. I think it's a massive game for them.
Yeah, definitely. But we'll drop down and talk about Arbroath's former manager. Oh, that's a really good link there, Shaughan. You've set us up very well because there's not really much that's happened in League Two. I suppose just as a bonus point, I don't know how much you looked into. You've been keeping an eye on what's the transfer business at Bonnyrigg at all?
They have lost about 4 players in the last week.
In the last week, yeah. Josh Grigor left. Smart Osadollar has joined Bo'ness. And Bradley Rodden left the club. And Bradley Rodden was the strangest one out of a lot of them because he just joined. He'd been there about 8 or 9 weeks. He left Stenhousemuir at the start of June to join them. And it prompted the manager to actually put a statement out on the club website to explain what was going on, saying that 2 players wanted to play elsewhere. One of them had an offer to, I think that's right, am I right in saying one of them had an offer to join someone else, and the other one wanted to leave the club and play for a team closer to his house. I'm going to assume that's Rodden. But it doesn't augur well at this stage of the season. I mean, they lost to Peterhead. They conceded a last minute goal against Peterhead. So it doesn't sound like all's well. I know Bonnyrigg do seem like they're in a degree of flux at the moment because they largely for the past 2 years, certainly since came into the SPFL, going with largely the same group of players, then all of a sudden you're seeing a turnover, and then you're seeing like that turnover being turned over as well, and it's a lot of guys coming in from Trinent.
They seem to swap players.
Yeah.
And I mean, I suppose the concern would be that I think, and I'm still of the opinion that, I mean, I watched Edinburgh versus Stirling Albion at the weekend, and I think on another day, Stirling Albion win by more than the goal they did, albeit it was a tremendous goal in I think it was an injury time that they scored. It's a late goal. Tremendous finish, but I do think on another day, Stirling win by more. So I think Edinburgh will be in the bottom 2 places. Mm-hmm. We kind of tipped Bonnyrigg as being maybe one of the teams that they would have, that they would hope that they could maybe finish above, and the fact that they seem to have this, and I know that they've put out a statement as an explanation as to why they've lost so many players over the week. I would still be concerned if I was a Bonnyrigg fan.
Yeah, me too. That's the only interesting thing that's happened out with the football. But this only happened after we had decided to do a grab bag podcast, and we didn't have this on the curriculum, so that's why it's just going in there. It's just a bonus, but that's the beauty of a grab bag. There is no real structure to it. You can just pick and choose. It's like going to the cinema for a big bag of pick and choose. I was going to call it pick and choose, pick and mix. Sorry, that's the off-brand version of pick and mix. Pick and choose.
You said it was patented. Can you patent a grab bag if there was no structure to it?
Well, Shaughan, unless you want to come with me tomorrow morning for 9:30 to the patent office in Glasgow, we can have a discussion about what is and what isn't patentable. And let me assure you, if there's anyone here listening to this thinking of doing a grab bag podcast, just try and see how far you get, son. That's all I'll say.
I don't want to go to the patent office with you at 9:30 tomorrow.
Well, you're going to have to. We'll discuss it. We'll discuss this offline, Shaughan. We'll discuss this offline. But we'll go up to Borough Briggs, where Elgin City took on East Fife and they beat them 4-2. And I think that Elgin City could be the dark horses in League Two this season. Basically, Kyle Girvin and Jack Murray put the City 2 up before the interval. Russell Dingwall netted a third shortly afterwards. And although Andy Munro and Conor McManus scored a stunning goal for the Fifers, Ryan Sargent hit them on the counter with 5 minutes remaining. So that's Elgin, top of League Two. Dark horses.
I haven't listened to this week's episode of Borough Briggs Beat, but I will do because Deshaun Golding's on it, so I'll definitely listen to that. You're right.
I think, just on that, I think I'd read in Pie and Bottle that Golding had said he was actually close to chucking football because of how disappointed his time at Cove Rangers was. So that doesn't reflect well on the people at Cove, if you take what he's saying on face value.
Well, there you go. You're right. They could be dark horses. I thought they'd be better this season. I thought they'd be okay. Didn't necessarily see them as title challengers.
Sign Mark Gallagher. He's come back. That's a brilliant signing.
So this is a very entertaining game. If they come up against teams that defend as poorly as East Fife for the next 35 league games, then yes, they could win this division.
Do you know the movie Speed? Right,
I'm aware of it.
And the whole point of the movie Speed, if this bus goes below 50 miles an hour, it's going to explode. Well, imagine that, but the captain of East 5, Stuart Murdoch's told, if you touch a football, you will explode. But he's not allowed to tell anyone, so he's just got to try and get out of the way of the football as often as possible. He had an absolute nightmare here. He and Brian Easton. I mean, there you go. Two of your most your more reliable players just having shanners here.
So yeah, you're right. So both of them didn't have impressive performances, and I wasn't overly impressed with Liam McFarlane in goals. The young guy they've got on loan from Hearts. I think I said in the preview podcast that he was highly rated. What I will say is that came from a tweet from Joel Sked. I do wonder if Alan Fleming is perhaps a better option.
Shaughan, if you've learned anything by this stage, when it comes to Heart Midlothian, don't go to Joel Sked. I love the guy to bits, but he really is maroon-pilled.
You're right. From now on, I go to Barry Anderson.
Well, there you go. Did you see that tweet that the guy wrote about Barry Anderson's celebrating his daughter's exam results, and what that guy replied to him with?
Dreadful, really dreadful stuff.
Absolutely dreadful. Yeah, that was. Sorry, I mean that just popped into my head there. Check out Barry Anderson's timeline if you want to see like one of the most mankiest replies. And they go, sorry, Shaughan, I interrupted you there. You were talking about how much a Joel Sked's a banger.
No, I'd essentially come to the end of my point where the defensively East 5 have been dreadful, but I don't think they were helped by Liam McFarlane's performance. I think it might have been the last one. Like the last one went through him. I can't remember. Like the camera stayed on the players as they walked back to take position for the kickoff. And I can't remember what defender it was or what East 5 player it was, but they basically just kind of pointed behind them to McFarlane and then just kind of shake their head, just kind of shoot their head as if to say, listen, this boy's not going to do. And I felt bad, but it didn't have a good game. No,
I suppose though, as we said, that's the danger of signing a young goalkeeper on loan. They're going to make mistakes. And they're going to make mistakes on your dime. And that's unfortunately what we saw there. But I don't think he was the worst offender. I thought that Murdoch almost had a mistake very early on that should have led to a goal, a bit profligate from Elgin. And he led to a mistake that Elgin did score from. And Brian Easton was the same in the second half. I think it was Dingwall's goal that he just completely lost, basically fell underneath the ball. But you can only beat what's in front of you, and I think that's just an impressive performance from Elgin. I think that the challenge that Elgin will have, Borough Briggs has always been, or certainly the perception of Borough Briggs has always been, and it's cliche, but a difficult place to go to. It's one of the most remote grounds relative to other sides in the SPFL. Players refer to it as like a camel trek. They don't like going up there. It's because it's your whole day. If you're playing against Elgin City, that is you out the action for the entire day. And Elgin need to play up to that. They need to make Borough Briggs a difficult place to go. I think broadly speaking, they do that, especially since Alan Hale's come in. The big challenge for Elgin, their away form is terrible. Now, I'm not sure. I think they've picked up something like 4 or 5 points since Hale came in. From away from home, they do need to. That's something they definitely do need to work on. However, I do think they've got the personnel that can do that. I think I saw Gallagher playing for them last season. Makes a huge difference. Just somebody who wants to get on the ball, someone who wants to drive the team forward, and it's all his passes seem to be. Doesn't he really go sideways? He's always looking to play the ball forward. We spoke about in the preview podcast, Deshaun Golding. One of the best back-to-goal strikers, probably behind Jordan Allen, actually, in terms of back-to-goal strikers in that division. Someone who, in terms of, was involved in certainly 2 of the 4 goals, in terms of his flick-ons or some of his passes. Great forward, and whatever Alan Hale's doing with him, it's certainly working. I think there's a lot to like about Elgin. I don't want to get too carried away, but I do think they could be dark horses, not to win the division certainly, but maybe for the top 4. Finally, Elgin City are actually. I think this could be a season where they could. You're doing that purse thing with your lips. No, I'm talking shite.
No, I don't think you're talking shite. But I think one of the things that goes against them is what you've just described as one of the positives. So you've said that nobody likes going to Borough Briggs because it's an all-day affair. Like you're literally out from morning to evening. But like East Fife, for example, only need to do that. Like every team just needs to do it twice a season. But Elgin City need to do it every second week.
Yes,
and that is so. If you're saying that is a massive positive in terms of their home form, you're right. How do they turn that massive negative to their advantage for their away form? And I don't know how they do it, because they have signed players from the higher league this season, and on top of the fact that's a massive positive, because it just feels like there is a closer, more close knit group of players, because they are not necessarily local,
but they'll stay
certainly from the north, they're relatively close. But that probably means that almost everybody is now having to make that journey every second week. We'll see how they cope with that. What I would say is, as much as we have talked about East Fife's poor defending, like over and above that, like Elgin created other like really good chances to score. So it was 4-2, but it was kind of going on like 5 or 6-2. Like it could have been even more convincing. So no, I was impressed by them.
Not necessarily impressed by East Fife though. We mentioned some of the defending there. They did score a really good goal though. Like Conor McManus's goal was the pick of the bunch, a sort of a half volley from the edge of the area.
Yeah.
Very well taken.
Really, really, really good technique. I suppose the only other thing I would say about the game is Dick Campbell's attire at the sidelines. Now he put on a jacket for the post game interview, where as usual he was asked one question and it lasted like about 4 minutes, which is fair enough. But in terms of what he was wearing at the side of the park, he was still wearing a bonnet, but he was wearing it looked like a kind of short sleeved, kind of reasonably tight polo shirt. So it looked like he was visiting a down on its luck seaside English town, and because he was so unhappy, it looked like maybe a seagull had stole his chips. It was just a really bad day all around for him.
I would have had East Fife as outsiders, or certainly I think I had East Fife for the top 4. I mean, again, not going to write them off on one game, but certainly a lot to work on. But it's when you make so many errors, like with players who traditionally don't do that. I don't want to be so dismissive, but I think you do have to put it down as like a bad day at the office.
Probably. I mean, considering, and again, we've touched on this on the preview podcast. Don't want to hark.
It's a good show. Give it a go.
Good show. Give it a blast. But I thought that there was, when it became abundantly clear that East Fife weren't going to get in the playoffs last season, that Dick Campbell had alluded to the fact that he felt that they needed a big churn of players, a big turnover. That's not happened. By and large, they're relying on the same group of players as last season, and unless he can get more out of them, and based on Saturday, I'm not entirely sure that's the case, then I'm not entirely sure they will be top 4. I also enjoyed the fact they said he doesn't know who he's playing next Saturday.
He says that all the time, man. He says it all the time.
I still liked it though.
One final thing to point out, Shaughan, on the big preview podcast that we have spoken a lot about, we said that Kyle Girvan's move from Stranraer to Elgin City was probably the most geographically absurd transfer that's ever taken place in Scottish football, where a player has played for the southernmost team in Scotland and is transferred directly to the northernmost team. Now, Lawrence Nelson, who is the commentator for Stranraer TV, world-class play-by-play commentator,
God bless him.
And him and Brian Martin, they are the equivalent of like a custard cream. Like, Lawrence is the biscuit, Brian's the cream. That's just how good they work together. But Lawrence, when he said, thank you, Lawrence, as well for listening to the preview podcast, and thank you very much for listening all the way through before we got to your team. But he mentioned a guy called Bobby Duffy, who played for Stranraer and for Brora Rangers. Now, Brora Rangers is significantly further north than Elgin. Now, I went online to try and find more information about Bobby Duffy. I couldn't find it. I'm not sure if he transferred directly from Stranraer to Elgin City. So do let us know. Otherwise, I'm still going to have Kyle Girvan's move as the most long distance transfer in Scotland I can think of.
Are you casting aspersions on the knowledge of Stranraer's commentary team?
Well, he goes under the name Stair Park Sage on Twitter, so maybe not. Maybe I'm in the wrong. Maybe I'm in the wrong. But it'd be nice to know. It would just be nice to know.
Ditto.
Okay, well, do let us know about Bobby Duffy's career. That's all we're asking. Well, Shaughan, I think that'll probably do us.
I think so. Comprehensive.
Yeah, I am getting right into animated graphics at the moment, so I'm going away to try out some of that.
I saw your first example. You had an animated Stenhousemuir badge. You put it on Instagram.
I've just done an animated thing with Stenhousemuir players as well. I spoke to I spoke to the former head of media and asked him for if I could get a shot of the assets from last season, all the player photos and all that. So he is very kindly, Ian Fitzpatrick, great guy, he's very kindly given me all the squad photos from last season just so I can practice on. So I'm just wanting to get good at Adobe After Effects and Premiere Pro, and just trying to make stuff in Photoshop as well, and just trying to make stuff look snazzy. And it's difficult and it's challenging, but it's a lot of fun. See when the stuff comes off and it looks good. It looks really good. Check my Instagram story, Shaughan. You might see something in there that you like.
So I've seen the badge. I've seen the badge that essentially appears a bit at a time. How long did that? How long did that take you?
Well, at the moment, I'm doing it by following YouTube tutorials.
Okay. So
effectively, I've got one laptop up with a YouTube tutorial and one with the After Effects on, so I know what I'm doing, but I don't know why I'm doing it. No. So if you came to me and said, "Craig, can you make this?" I'd be like, "I don't know, mate. I don't know how to do that." I'd have to look up for a YouTube tutorial. So I'm trying to get to the stage where I can do stuff by myself, know that this is what I want to make and know how to do it. I'm not quite there yet.
Oh. But how long did it take you to make that gently appearing Stenhousemuir badge?
Probably about an hour and a bit.
Oh, that's fine.
No, it took me long. So I made one version and it was terrible, so I had to delete it. Despite the fact I thought I'd follow these instructions to the letter, so I made another one. It took about an hour and a bit. Aye,
that's
just trying
okay.
to get to used to it. So that's I'm going away and to do that tonight.
Well, listen, I can't wait to see the results.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for sticking with myself and Shaughan for the last 75 minutes or so. Your company is always greatly appreciated, but not as much as your support for our Patreon. We have spoken about Craig Cairns' excellent At The Match podcast. They're worth subscribing for alone, but there's loads of great stuff in there as well. Tom Watt and Gary Cocker spoke about St Johnstone versus Aberdeen. And so if that's the sort of thing that interests you, then get your wallet out. Simple as that. But I suppose, Shaughan, that's probably enough for us.
A fantastic first week of the season. A lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about. Aye, but Shaughan, are you going to do a podcast next week?
There's lots of derbies to talk about. I would love to talk about.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think we'll do our patented 3-game roundup. We'll touch on Dunfermline versus Falkirk.
Yes.
Arbroath versus Montrose.
Yes.
And it's not really a derby, but it's the closest thing we'll get to a derby. I think it's Spartans versus Bonnyrigg.
We can kind of squeeze it in, and I know we'll kind of have to. It doesn't really make sense, but ultimately it will do.
It's the Edinburgh City Spartans derby. That's the one I'm looking for. I think someone's getting knifed at that. I really do think there's the violence is going to spill out into the streets of the Morrison's car park.
Tifo v Tifo.
Park. Yes, oh my goodness. Oh, a really badly animated gladiator being hoisted up 4 feet into the air. Wow.
Anyway.
Can't wait to see that. But listen, until then, Shaughan and I will be back next week to discuss all that and maybe more. But unlike... Oh, I should have written something down. Unlike Cammy McPherson's Twitter page, enjoy your football. Please do so respectfully. Thank you very much. Take care. Good night. God bless.